Our next speaker is Dr. Barry Smith, who is the SUNY Distinguished Professor in the Departments of Philosophy, Neurology, and Computer Science, and the Director of the National Center for Ontological Research here at the University of Buffalo. He's an internationally recognized ontologist and a very prolific author. I can't claim to have read even a small fraction of his articles. He's written over 500 of them. One of them is entitled, "Do Mountains Exist? Towards an Ontology of Landforms." So if you really want to expand your mind a little bit, take a look at it. It's very interesting stuff. So I think it's a reflection of the increasing interdisciplinarity of almost everything we do in academia, that we have a philosopher here to talk to us, to an audience mainly of information scientists and librarians about data. But when I was looking through Dr. Smith's CV, I was surprised to see that much of his work, or a good portion of his work, is about applying philosophical theories to information science. So I think we have a lot we can learn from him. In 2002, Dr. Smith received the Wolfgang Paul Award in the amount of 2 million euros, which, just to give you a sense of the magnitude of that, was, I believe, according to the article I saw, the largest award ever given to a philosopher. So, big time stuff. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Barry Smith.
So I don't have a dancing daughter, but I did recently do some work on the Ontology of Dancing, which was published in a volume entitled Switching Codes, which was about the invasion of the humanities and the arts by computers in one form or another. And the title of the piece that I wrote with a colleague of mine, who is a Flemish bioinformatician who is crazy about Celtic dancing, is entitled Dancing with the Ontological Engineers. And we start with a definition of dancing, which we found in Adam Smith, of all places, who is no relation, but I know. This is my colleague, and this is an Irish dancing partner that he was partnering with a couple of years ago. And the term that we are interested in, which is a long term, ontologies often contain long terms, as we shall see, it's what he's doing with his right leg here. Basically, he's moving it in a certain specific way. Now, the way he is moving his leg might be described in a number of different ways according to the context in which that movement occurs. So you may have a mannequin on a catwalk, or an epileptic who is moving his leg as part of some kind of spasm, or a soccer player who is kicking a ball, or someone sending a signal by moving their leg. Or it could mean a half cut in Shrinkwrap dancing, or it could mean 100 different things in other kinds of dancing. Or in traditional Shrinkwrap dancing, or in Shrinkwrap dancing the way they perform it in Londonderry at Christmas. So there are many, many different classifications of one and the same movement. Now, the reason why we created the ontology, this is a fragment of the ontology of the left leg, just for illustrations purposes. We created the ontology as a means of showing how the UNESCO, which was at that time trying to create a way of devising a repository of what they called intangible cultural artifacts. So they were collecting, and still are collecting, many, many reference videos of people dancing, and of people dancing in the contemporary way, and of people dancing in 18th century costumes in the 18th century way. And the problem arose, if you have all of these videos of people dancing, how would you ever find what you want? And that means that you need to annotate these videos. And then the question is, what terms do you use to annotate these videos? And you probably are going to need to do this in a non-redundant, effective way. And that's what ontologies are all about. Ontologies are non-redundant, effective, controlled vocabularies for describing data or for describing anything, even the movement of the leg, in such a way that computers can reason with the results of using those terms to annotate the data, and also human beings can use those terms to find the data. So these are the questions that I'm going to be talking about now. They are questions which are going to become ever more urgent and ever more complicated and ever more tragically difficult to respond to, for all the reasons which Fran has just described. It's only going to get worse. So how do you find data? How do you understand the data when you find it? How do you understand even your own data? Because very often people create a database without a license, without passing any kind of database bar exam, without paying a database tax. And they use acronyms because they need to fit everything on a screen. So they create short acronyms so that the tables will be nice and slim. And then they can't remember what the acronyms mean because they were never taught in computer science school that using acronyms should mean that you document very, very carefully what the acronyms mean. Except in Fran's lectures, of course. How do you use the data when you find it? You need to be able to use it for hypothesis checking and reasoning, and that means that the data needs to be computable. How do you integrate with other data? That's the really hard part, which I'm going to be focusing on primarily today. How do you label the data that you're collecting now? So how do you build a good way of describing your data? And how do you do that in such a way that the labels that you use will integrate well with the labels which other people are using in neighboring domains? And probably it's not a good thing to build a completely new set of labels when there already is a good set of labels for your domain which you just didn't bother to go and look for. So I now see the database tax more in terms of a title search. When you want to build a new building, you are forced by the licensing authorities to check that no one else has already claimed that building or built gas lines underneath it. You have to perform due diligence to make sure that you don't cause problems. Database designers have never been taught due diligence. Now, the ontology industry has grown up not just because of the massive explosion of data, but particularly in the biological world, which is the world I've worked in most, as a result of the Human Genome Project. But it's grown up also because of the new possibilities of the web. The idea is that the integration of data is achieved in a very effective way by means of web links, hyperlinks. So the idea is that the integration problems of the web in the future will be addressed increasingly by taking advantage of what is called netcentricity. So you build a website, others discover your website, they link to it, and the more people link to it, the more your website becomes a kind of standard. Other people begin to rely on it, and as a result of this, your website becomes much more valuable than you anticipated. The data which it contains then will be used for all sorts of purposes which you have no notion of. So this is called secondary use. Now, the problem is that if we leave it to the web and to the spontaneous orders created by people using linking, and because people are anarchists, or anyway, because people are lazy, or because people are egotists, so they want to use their own terms, we end up with complicated hairballs, silos, redundancies, and the kind of nice integration that we would like to have is achieved only by accident and in part. What we have instead are multiple, I know it sounds odd to talk about overlapping silos, but that's what we have. We have silos which are tied at certain points to other silos, but tied mostly to nothing at all. And in biology, this is, and in medicine, it's even worse. In biology, this is a bad thing, even though biologists generally want to share their data. In medicine, it's a bad thing because medical people generally, for all kinds of reasons, good and bad, don't want to share their data. So I'm getting used to this device. By the end, I'll be in good shape. So, to avoid this silo effect, wise people involved in the founding of the internet, including Tim Berners-Lee, created something called the Semantic Web. The Semantic Web, which is fed by people creating software, which together forms what we can call semantic technology, tries to avoid silos by making the data on the web available in a standard web, and by making the links among the data work in such a way as to create what is called a web of data. And here ontologies are explicitly used to capture common meanings with definitions which can be used by both humans and computers to navigate around the web. So this is a way of harnessing the fact that while hardware changes very quickly, and while data expands enormously and new websites are created all the time, the meanings of the words which people use on those websites, both in the ordinary, everyday dry cleaning world and in the science world, change rather slowly, and they change in a monotonic way, usually. So there are, in spite of what you may have been told by excited French philosophers, very few real revolutions in science, and almost none in ordinary life, when it comes to the meanings of words. So we take the common words which change slowly, we create ontologies of those common words with definitions, and then we use the web architecture to annotate the exploding data stores using these ontologies, so that the ontologies are effectively creating a nicely ordered set of web pages which are linked together in useful ways, and everything is hunky-dory. And this idea was explicitly recognized by the NIH when it formulated its mandates for data reuse. So the NIH was worried by the silo problem. It didn't want to be spending billions of dollars on research and then have the data be unusable because it was unfindable. And so they mandated that the results obtained through funded research, the data should be more easily accessible to external groups, and that means formulating a plan for reuse. And one good way of formulating such a plan, as is acknowledged, for instance, here, is by creating an ontology for your data. And ontologies are being created now. This I find amazing. I've been doing ontology for 35 years. For the first 25 years of those 35 years, I could talk to about 3 people. And now there are whole industries building ontologies. Every single military agency now has whole centers devoted to military ontology. There is, in particular, the National Center for Biomedical Ontology, which was founded by the NIH as part of this effort to promote reuse of data, and which has 3 centers in the PI team that runs it. One is the Stanford Biomedical Research Informatics, one is the Mayo Clinic, and the other one is the Department of Philosophy in Buffalo. So we in Buffalo seem to be doing something right when it comes to tackling the ontology problem. The NCBO has created something called a bioportal, which is a place where you can go to see ontologies in the biomedical domain and search them and use them to annotate your own data and thereby address the NIH mandates. And this is, I can honestly say, probably the best thing there is in the way of portals for ontology research. saying this even though I'm part of the organization that built it, because I'm going to be criticizing it in a minute. So, the goals of semantic technology are to support data reuse, data registries, metadata management. You can use these ontologies to support natural language understanding because the ontologies give you a benchmark of what things might be, even if people are not using quite the right words for those things. There are now semantic wikis based on ontologies, and nearly all of this effort is connected one way or another to something called the Web Ontology Language, or OWL. This is really wonderful stuff. Lots of things are happening. We have more and more semantically enhanced data using annotations with terms taken from ontologies. Even Google is starting to use ontologies. The new iPhone, the Siri, voice recognition-based tool in the new iPhone is based on ontologies. So it really is working. It's doing its thing. And it's breaking down silos and it's creating useful integration. And the result, it looks a bit like this. It's called linked open data. And in the biomedical domain, in March 2009, linked open data was like this. Each one of these is an ontology, and each one of these ontologies is linked to databases, sometimes to hundreds of databases. And this must be a good thing. This is how it looked in September 2010. I think now it must be so hairballish that there's no point taking pictures of it, because I couldn't find one. But if you look more closely, you see nice biological things, including the protein database, which is, I think, behind my thing here, down here. And then Reactome and Gene ID and Drug Bank and so on. PubMed. But then if you go over here, you see BBC programs and PubGuide and something called Music Brains and Audio Scrabbler. And you begin to think that there's something a bit fishy here. So this is supposed to be linked open data for biomedicine. Why do they have Virtuoso Sponger? Or, so I am afraid that in spite of all this wonderful development, what we have to deal with here is a massive failure. I'm not going to say that it's a massive scam, because I know that some of it really is good work. But there is something fishy about it. And the fishiness comes about as a result of the success of ontologies. So we probably need an ontology tax. The more people see how semantic technology brings benefits, the more they want to build ontologies. And some people, I've been to meetings, military meetings, where some leader of an informatics group in the military will stand up and say, I was told by my customer that I had to build an ontology for this or that. So I Googled the word ontology last weekend. And this is my ontology. I saw one of those ontologies which cost $950,000. And it was something that would take a good ontologist 2 hours to build well. It wasn't bad actually, but it was $950,000. Now, the idea is very, very simple, I think. As we break down the silos by using ontologies, the very success of that leads to the creation of new ontologies. Everybody wants to have their own ontology. And the semantic web was modeled on the internet. So the semantic web was created as a vision of Tim Berners-Lee. And the internet is a good thing. And it's based upon freedom. Anyone, provided they use HTML syntax, can create their own website in any kind of way. There is no website tax. Tim Berners-Lee wanted the semantic web to be similarly unconstrained. You just have to use the syntax of OWL. But you can use the very same word to mean a completely different thing from what everyone else uses it to mean, and still be working within the semantic web. And you can use different words to mean the same thing and thereby create islands of redundancy within the semantic web. And the result is that you're back in the silos. You have data cemeteries. We probably need more data cemeteries, in fact, but then we should build something useful on top of them. All right, so let's see how this works in the BioPortal. The BioPortal enables you to search ontologies. There are 270 ontologies in the BioPortal. And I'm not going to say anything about how good they are, because they're mainly not good. The problem is that there are many of them. So if you enter the term obesity, then you get all of these ontologies, all of them containing the term obesity, not necessarily using the same definition. So there are many, many, many obesity ontologies. And a user of the BioPortal to find useful ontology content for a research on obesity has no guidance as to which ontology to use. And so there is a failure in bringing about consistent annotation of data using ontologies rather than the intended success. Now, I am convinced that one reason for this effect is what I call the Shrinkwrap software mentality. And I am convinced that people in computer science school are all dreaming about becoming rich by creating some software that Microsoft will buy from them. And all of those people know that you will not get paid for reusing old and good ontologies. They're going to go to their first employer and they're going to say, I know you want me to build an ontology, but we have to build a new one, because then you'll see how good I am and it will be ours. And that's exactly breaking the very point of ontology. And I know that computer scientists in the ontology business make this mistake, because I'm surrounded by them, I work with them. They all make this mistake, because it's built into their genes as computer scientists. Now, another thing which is built into the genes of many computer scientists is the belief that there are no good ontologies. They're all equally neither good nor bad. They are just human products, and we shouldn't be evaluative. We shouldn't criticize someone else's software. They're nice people, but that means that they end up allowing bad things, which truly are bad, and I can prove that if I have another 4 hours, bad things to be creating, to poisoning the wells and making the good things then less valuable. So there should be a database inspection tax, and there should be an ontology licensing regime, just as there are in building codes. Good. Now, some people say that the way to solve the problem is to create mappings between these ontologies. So if we have one ontology and we have another ontology which is about more or less the same thing, then let this group use their ontology and that group use their ontology, and then we will map between them. And that doesn't work, because no one bothers to keep the maps up to date, but the ontologies themselves are changing. And so the maps break, they become fragile. This is incidentally the basis of the Unified Medical Language System, which is the National Library of Medicine's approach to the ontology proliferation problem, which existed already in the age of terminology, which is simple vocabularies of medicine. They said, let's have all of these medical vocabularies in our system, and then we'll unify them by creating mappings between them. And they have huge numbers of mappings, and it's all very wonderful and useful. But it's completely the wrong way to go. It's like having 14 different telephone systems in your country and then trying to connect them by means of mappings, which no one cares about, which means that you can sometimes get through, but usually not. So an example of mappings, which I won't say where it comes from, but many of these mappings are based on string matching. So there is an ontology which has all phenotypes as its root node. It's a phenotype ontology. And there is another ontology which has all organisms as its root node. That's the NCBI taxonomy. And then there is another ontology which has the word allose in it, which is a form of sugar. And then there is yet another ontology which has acute lymphoblastic leukemia in it, the acronym of which is ALL. Now these 4 things get matched, they mapped, because they all contain the 3 letters ALL. And there are people who are proud of this. So, why should you care? Well, the library users need to find data, and then you need to use that data. And the existing resources are not always going to respond to either of those needs. And if you try and do it with mappings, then your codes will constantly be needing to be repaired to keep up. And no one will do that. No one keeps mappings up to date. And the Department of Defense is spending $6 billion a year just on this problem. And that's because, now I don't want to criticize librarians here, but there is a tendency among librarians not to throw books away. This tendency manifests itself in the UMLS. The UMLS is designed to keep old medical terminologies alive, because no one wants to throw them away. It's librarians, National Library of Medicine. Now there's a similar tendency in the military. Generals always want to keep their toys. And if they have a toy, which is an information system for shooting things, they will, and yet they're told they need to use the standard one, which everyone else uses, they will say, yes, okay, we'll use the standard one. They will keep the old one. And then they need to build a mapping. Eventually they'll have 7, and then they have to have 14 different mappings, which will require another mapping, so they have 13 already, or 15. So we need to throw things away. Now there are other problems for the linked open data, but I think you get the idea. I won't go through this. So how do we do it right? I think I know what might be the answer to this. And if this isn't the answer, I don't know any other answers, so we're lost. How do you create a Darwinian process so that some things will survive naturally because they are good, and other things will die? Now, I don't think the tax strategy would solve this, because you couldn't manage Darwinian evolution by taxing new species. But we need something which is incremental and evolutionary. And what that means is that we need to create a scenario in which people will find it profitable to reuse existing ontologies because they've been tried and tested and found to work. And so then we will have a kind of accumulation in the realm of semantic technology. Now, if you look at PubMed and search the word ontology, you will see that since the year 2000, it's grown by 960%, I think, and it continues to grow. Which suggests that the ontology method is being embraced by biomedical scientists, which suggests also that it's somehow useful. So they have found a useful service that ontology can perform. But if you examine these statistics more carefully, you will see that there is one ontology. Hang on. So this is the same statistics, but divided into ontologies and controlled vocabularies, but that's the same. So this is the important slide. You will see that there's one ontology, which is the kind of green ontology here, which during the same period has overwhelmed all the other ontology artifacts and terminologies and UMLS kinds of things. And that is the gene ontology. So something like 78% of all uses of the term ontology in PubMed refer to just one ontology. Now that suggests that this one ontology is really doing it right. This one ontology has become an attractor for people who need an ontology in their work. So why is the gene ontology so successful? Well, first of all, it's multi-species. So if you're doing mouse experiments, you can, if you annotate the data using the gene ontology, then the results will be comparable to data you've annotated from fish or humans or yeast. It's multidisciplinary, which means it can be used by biochemists, by geneticists, by clinicians. It didn't restrict it to any one disciplinary vocabulary. It's open source. It's free to use. And in a way, it plays a role similar to the role played by kilograms and meters in seconds in physics. It provides a standard vocabulary which everyone can accept, and thereby it creates a kind of comparability and cumulativity. And it provides natural language and logical definitions for all. There are something like 30,000 terms in the genome ontology. They're all defined in a consistent way which would be acceptable to biologists. And so the strategy that the Go addresses is the following. You go to PubMed and you enter a search term and you get 17,536 responses. And so you need to find some way of locating your the results you need in the precise organism that you're concerned about, with the precise protein that you're interested in. And it may be that you are interested also in certain specific sources of microarray data in that organism using that protein as a search term. And what the Go does, I'll go through this quickly. What the Go does is it's used to annotate PubMed literature very, very carefully by human beings, not by computers, so that every time a certain protein is mentioned in the context of a certain sort of biological process, and that biological process will have a Go term, that Go term will be used to annotate that protein, so that people can use the Go term to find papers which mention that protein. Or they can use the protein to find papers which mention that Go term. And many other different combinations are possible. So, I'll show you how it works. This is the Amigo, which is one of the many search tools which have been built to utilize this huge body of data, which is literature annotated using Go. So you enter your search term, which is here heart muscle development, and you can restrict to specific, there are various kinds of filters, so you can filter to specific organism types, mouse or rat or yeast or whatever it might be. You can restrict in a number of other ways, and you will get a list of responses which are Go terms which address your initial search term, which are linked. Here that this Go term is linked to 31 proteins. You can click on this, you get a list of those 31 proteins. And you know that those 31 proteins are relevant to cardiac muscle development. You know that these 27 proteins are relevant to cardiac muscle cell development. You know that there are only 2 gene products, or 2 proteins in the literature so far, which have been identified as being relevant to atrial cardiac muscle cell development, and so on. Now this turns out to be an extremely useful starting point for doing research. So this is just a bigger version of what we had before. You also get definitions of what cardiac muscle development precisely is, so that you know what we're talking about, and those definitions exist in computable form. But you can also search in the other direction. So you can search according to data source. So if you're interested in the protein database, you can use the protein database as the starting point of your search. You can filter by evidence code. So if you're only interested in associations between proteins and Go terms, which have been identified in actual observations in experiments, and you can restrict your search to those kinds of annotations. If you're interested also in postulated associations, then you can have a much larger set of responses, and so forth. So, the Go provides answers for each protein to these kinds of questions. And for any given kind of biological phenomenon, it will give you a quite rich repertoire of relevant terms. So pain, for instance. This is just an example of a few pain terms which you find in Go and which you can use to find gene products which have been identified as relevant to pain experiences in different organisms, and the papers where they were described. The Go itself is organized as a big hierarchy, and this enables certain kinds of simple reasoning to be performed, and this turns out now to be a secondary use of the Go, which has become clinically quite important. So in the olden days, if you needed to find the genes relevant to cardiac muscle cell development in yeast, it might have taken you months. You might have had to do the experiments yourself. Now you can find all that information within milliseconds. And you can find not just genomic data and proteomic data, also clinical data and public health data. They're all linked to the Go in one way or another, so that the Go has become a kind of switchboard for bringing together data from different places. And I'll just give you one standard illustration. So this is a paper published in Science reporting a study of breast and colorectal cancers. That 13,023 genes were identified in a certain sample set of tumors. And the problem was to find out which ones were relevant to the carcinomatous effect. And the gene ontology was used to provide a benchmark of typical expression of genes in corresponding tissues. And then it was rather easy to identify which genes were more highly expressed because they deviated from the benchmark. And this kind of method is now standard in clinical science. So we hired in Buffalo a biostatistician who was using the Go on a daily basis. And I really think that he did not know what the G and the O in the Go meant. It was such a standard tool of biostatistics that he was not aware that there was such a thing as ontologists. So, why is the Go successful? Well, it's maintained by biologists who know about ontology best practices. They know their biology. They don't add anything to the Go unless it's biologically accurate. It's been used now to create over 11 million annotations relating to all the standard databases and to experimental results reported in 52,000 journal articles, which have been manually annotated by living human PhD biologists. And it's maintained over time in a nice feedback way, in the sense that if annotators who are reading papers discover mistakes in the Go, then they immediately send back a message which will lead to the correction or the addition of new terms to the Go. So, these are some lessons. If ontologies are going to serve the tasks that we expect of them, then they have to be kept in good shape by experts who know what they're doing, so that the potential users, namely the owners of data resources, will respect those annotations. And many people have to be willing to use the Go in annotations. So the reason why we get data cemeteries or roach motels in the data world, where the army will spend billions of dollars to create a metadata repository which no one will use, is because no one is interested in using it. Because, for whatever reason, they think it's not reliable, they think it's not maintained by experts, they think there will be no benefits in using it. We have to incentivize people to using these resources. And that means they have to be well maintained. There is now a new profession of biocurator. There is an International Society for Biocuration. These are PhD biologists who give their lives to annotating published literature. That's what they do. They read papers and they tag them with HTML tags. And then they send back the results. This is, I think I've already said that. So, One thing which the Go has, which explains the Go success, is that it has clear versioning principles. So life cycle maintenance is very important if these things are to be not just respected, but respected for 150 years. If you spend a lot of money using something like the Go to annotate data in the year 2005, by 2010 science will have changed. And you still want the work you did in 2005 to be of value, which means that the gene, not just the gene ontology has to change to keep pace, but also the old annotations have to be checked to see whether they need to be updated in light of what the terms now mean in new versions of the Go. So the Go is updated every night. There is an official release at less frequent intervals, but the editor's version of the Go is constantly being updated. Now, the problem is that the Go is limited in scope. It only has terms for 3 kinds of biological entities: parts of cells, functions of molecules, and biological processes in general. So biological processes covers quite a large array. It includes death, it includes sex, it includes cell division, but it doesn't include diseases, symptoms, anything relevant to experimental processes. It only includes canonical or normal or natural organism processes. And so the problem then is to expand the Go. How do we extend this working methodology so that it applies in other areas of biology, and above all, so that it applies in medicine? Well, what we did was we created something called the OBO Foundry. OBO means Open Biomedical Ontologies. These are the 13 original states within the OBO Foundry, including the 3 parts of the Go ontology. And the goal is that for every area within the life sciences, there will be exactly one ontology. To avoid redundancy, people who try and build another ontology have to fight very hard to preserve some claim on the relevant territory, which is as it should be if this is a Darwinian process. You can see that when this was put together, which was 4 years ago, there were still some cases where 2 ontologies claimed the same territory, both of which were doing a good job, but they were doing it differently. We've now reached the point where we have treaty negotiations between those ontologies, so that we know exactly what their respective domains are. And these are meant to be orthogonal modules, and this means that we get the benefits of division of labor. So the biologists who know about cell biology are working here. The protein scientists who know about proteins are working in the protein ontology down here. And that means that we get the benefits of incentivization, because the people who are really interested in protein terminology get to contribute to the probe, and that means that they have an investment in making sure that it maintains its value, which means an investment in making sure that it maintains its scientific accuracy. And the OBO Foundry was recognized by the NIH as a framework which can be used to address the mandates for reuse of data. That's what the OBO Foundry is for. It's meant to provide a reliable way of finding data about specific biological phenomena. Okay, I'm going to leave this out. So we have a modular organization. We have training to ensure that the people who build ontologies within the OBO Foundry are doing it all in the same way. And we have a methodology for creating sub-ontologies. And we have a methodology for building ontologies generally, which is based upon the idea of populating downwards from ontologies which already exist. And now I'm going to conclude with some remarks on ontology and library science. This is really just for information purposes. So one of the problems with incentivization is that building ontologies and creating annotations is hard work. People want to get paid. And or people want to get tenure. If you say, I created 169 gene ontology terms on your vita, then the people who make tenure decisions will almost certainly not know what that means. And even if they did know what it meant, they wouldn't know how to measure its value. And so we have now quite a number of efforts, particularly Phil Bourne is responsible for much of this work, who is connected also with the protein database. And I'm sure you know Phil Bourne very well. So Nano Publishing is an online publishing model which is designed to take advantage of the fact that we can track tiny contributions. And so the goal is to create a system whereby we can give credit to authors even for contributing fragments of ontologies. And similarly, a way of giving credit to people who do annotations. So the work of biocurators needs to be somehow measured in ways which are calibrated with the ways we measure other kinds of contributions. Now, I'm going to say one or two things about biblio-ontologies. So I'm assuming that everyone in this room is much more familiar than I am with, or I don't even know how to pronounce it. So Ferber is a tiny thing. I think that it's better than most of the stuff I see in the ontology world. But it's still not quite good enough. But that doesn't mean that it should be scrapped. I am all in favor of scrapping things. I hope that's clear. Now there is something called Fabio. So how many people know about Fabio? No, Fabio is a very simple ontologized. Actually, no, that's incorrect. It's an ontologized version of Ferber, which has been expanded by some more content, which again is quite good, I think. And the man who I think is doing the best work in this field, who is also partly responsible for building Fabio, is a man called Paolo Ciccaresi, who is a neuroinformatician at Harvard Medical School, who has developed a number of very interesting ontology-related experiments in bibliomics, social networking, site tracking, and many of the other things I've been talking about here. There is also something called the information artifact ontology, which is the preferred ontology of the Obo Foundry for dealing with biblio, I'm not sure what the word is here either, biblio items. So papers, databases, ontologies, images, videos, all need to be, these are terms, all of which need to be used in annotating certain kinds of artifacts. And so the information artifact ontology is the biblio-related ontology that we use for annotating experiments and experimental results, which may be in the form of data, which may then be processed by software which creates new data. And we want to be able to describe the relation between the new data and the original data. And for that, we need a term for data processing, different kinds of data processing. So this is an area where Fabio and Ferber don't go far enough in the direction of what we need if we're going to keep track of where data comes from and what other data it's compatible with. And so another development which is growing, although not as quickly as one might think, given the opportunities, and I think this has something to do with the conservatism of the journal publishing industry. This is a paper about leptospira infection in urban slums. And this paper has been created in two forms. One form is the original published form, and then there's another form which is the semantically enhanced form. And there are, you can read it better here, there are 9 ontologies which have been used to annotate relevant terms in the paper. Now, in this way, we can make the annotation of journal articles much more systematically than is done at the moment, for instance, by the Go curators. And then, finally, there are two developments which are sponsored by the NIH, which are part of the NIH Resource Registry Initiative. One is called Eagle Eye and one is called Vivo. The idea behind Eagle Eye and Vivo is that there are lots of resources in the biomedical research and indeed in the clinical medicine world which are in medical schools and hospitals across the country, but no one can find them. Begin because they're all described in different ways, or they're not described at all, or they're described behind firewalls. So Eagle Eye and Vivo were founded as multi-site consortia to address this problem of how best to index biomedical research resources. And they use ontologies. They are supposed to compete. The NIH sees these two as competing efforts, but in fact, they share ontology resources. And the resources that they take are largely based on the Open Foundry resources that I referred to earlier. And some of them, so these are some of the ontologies which are being built in Buffalo, one way or another. So we are, and many of these are also either existing Open Foundry ontologies or they're candidate Open Foundry ontologies. These two are gradually being imported into the Eagle Eye Vivo ontology suite. So the idea is that there is a new role. I'm stealing things from Fran quite regularly. A new role for librarians as stewards of local digital data repositories. Now, I think this is much too modest. So I think librarians can take over the world. But they need to do it. If this is going to be global, it shouldn't be local, which means that you shouldn't build your own little lists. You should use standard lists. Now, I think that the Vivo and Eagle Eye ontologies are the appropriate standard lists. And if you have librarian friends who are using other lists, but you should just throttle them until they change their mind. And so I'll give you, just to conclude, one example of the data that we're going to have soon that we need to deal with. The genomes are very big data. And until now, people have been decoding the genomes of organisms. And then they started creating metagenomes, which are attempts to decode the flora inside your gut or your lung or your jaw. Now they are doing metagenomic decoding for cars. Just think of all the bacteria and buildings and airports. So it's never ending. They're just in the genomics realm. We're going to run out of storage space. But I'm only interested in the job of finding the data. I don't care about these storage. So that's it. That's the end. Thank you very much.